Good evening. My name's Jamie Mason. I'm Assistant Principal Learning and Teaching at Catholic Regional College. Tonight's presentation is a little bit of an explanation about the VCE and also the VCE vocational major. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time just talking about study scores and ATAR calculation, because that sometimes is a question that a number of people have. I'll really be guided by those of you that are in the session, though, because I'm going to go through my presentation relatively quickly, and then I'll call for any questions. And you can ask questions through the chat function, or the Q&A function, I should say, that you should see somewhere on your screen. So just quickly, you can see that when your son or daughter enters the senior school, they really have 3 certificates or pathways that they can choose, and they would have already chosen that by now. Some of your sons or daughters will be in the standard VCE, some may be in the vocational major, and probably not yet, but there might be some students who will end up in the Victorian Pathway Certificate. You can see that the pathways for the VCE over on the left there include apprenticeships, traineeships, and vet, and also university pathways. The vocational major also has a similar pathway, although the university entry is through alternate entry programs, and that is becoming more and more a feature of the post-school destination. So I was reading an article this morning, in fact, in The Age, about 30% of all university entry is now through an alternate entry pathway, not an ATAR. But of course, the ATAR is in some ways the easiest way to guarantee university entry. So if your son or daughter is thinking about the university pathway, then of course the ATAR is going to be useful. And then there's the final one over there, the pathway certificate, which is really designed to catch those students who are at risk of not completing their senior certificate through a number of different reasons. It might be through learning needs, it might be through interrupted schooling, it might be through any range of factors. So that final certificate is, if you like, a bit of a safety net to make sure that all students are able to graduate with some form of certification. That pathway is really about entry-level vet or work. And of course, the various pathways are really designed for different types of learning. So the VCE is certainly more subject and theoretical knowledge. Students are more likely to be sitting down in a traditional classroom and going through skills and knowledge that will end up getting towards some kind of final assessment, whether it be an exam or practical demonstration. Whereas the vocational pathway is much more flexible, much more learning through doing, and is also about preparing students for a future of work. The vocational major is something that has just started this year, and you can see through this slide, really, if your son or daughter is in that pathway, they will be completing the VCE vocational specialisation this year. If your son or daughter is in Year 12 and doing that pathway, they will end up with the VCE VM certificate at the end of this year. The traditional VCE is run over 2 years. We at CRC Sydenham, most of our students will do somewhere between 20 and 24 units, and 1 unit is the equivalent of a semester's work. We have a number of more than 90 subjects in which students can choose from. That includes some of our vet courses. If a student is doing year 11, they are doing predominantly unit 1 and 2, although they may be doing some units 3 and 4. And most of our year 12 students are doing what we call unit 3 and 4. English is compulsory in this certificate, and there will be school assessments and final exams for those students who are doing the scored pathway. The vocational major is also a 2-year secondary certificate. The 16 to 20 units required. They require at least 16 to get the certificate. There are 4 compulsory subjects: literacy, numeracy, personal development, and work-related skills. That is what we call our core subjects for the vocational major. It is compulsory to do a VET subject in this course. Students can also gain credit for time in the workplace. There are no study scores and no ATAR attracted to this certificate, and assessment is based on competency and learning activities rather than, if you like, the traditional summative tests. The final one, the pathways, you can see the requirements there are less than the other 2 certificates. 12 units required over 2 years, so you can see that if students are really struggling to complete a VCE or a vocational major, this is certainly a way of getting some kind of certification at the end of their schooling. In terms of pathways after year 12, VCE students, as I said before, they have further study options that include university and TAFE. The VCM also has those options, but they are going to be less extensive than the VCE, and the pathway certificate much less options in relation to post-school destinations rather than work or entry-level vocational education and training. I just wanted to use this slide, which is one of my favourites. I haven't changed the VCAL aspect of this, but really this is trying to show students and parents that by undertaking one of those 3 pathways, you're not totally excluding university entry. It might be that the ATAR, in fact, is the red arrow here. So the ATAR does allow that jump straight across to a degree level, whereas the vocational major may require a few more steps to get to that point. It must be said also that a number of our VCE students who finish at the end of the year 12 with the VCE certificate also make those steps. They don't go straight to university. They might go into a diploma level at TAFE and then opt into a degree. So I guess really important to know that regardless of your pathway, there are still many ways to get to a final destination of university, if that is what your son or daughter is after. If your son or daughter is in year 11 this year, this slide is just really trying to demonstrate the fact that in year 11, if a student is doing a unit 1 and 2 course, they are unscored. That's just the nature of the 1 and 2, unit 1 and 2. If your son and daughter is in year 11 and doing a unit 3-4, then of course they will get a score for that at the end of the year. But I guess the point of this slide is to say that at the end of year 11, we will be making decisions based on what happens in year 11, in particular what happens in scored assessments, SACs and exams, for example, about the suitability of students to undertake a scored pathway or an unscored pathway. So there are hurdle requirements that all students need to get over in order to enter a scored VCE. And that really is about ensuring that they're able to, in the majority of subjects, demonstrate that they can score somewhere around 60% for most of their scored assessment, and also that they're able to deal with the exam environment. So we have end of semester exams in June and also in November. And one of the reasons we have that is so that we can put students in that, if you like, slightly more high stakes and high stress environment to see how they cope with that environment. It's really important that students can demonstrate that, because if they can't cope with that environment, it is unlikely that they'll have a successful scored journey in their year 12. the majority of Unit 3 subjects have an exam at the end of the year, which counts for about 50% of the final study score. And that's why we make no apologies for the fact that exam performance is important for students who want to undertake a scored pathway. For students who do undertake an unscored pathway in Year 12, we're not required to rank students in that process. So the way that we assess students is really more about classwork and formative work rather than a final SAC or exam. Of course, if you're undertaking a scored pathway, then you will be required to undertake scored assessment both in Year 11 and Year 12. And the reason we do that is because we have to rank students based on performance. And so when a teacher is making assessments or doing assessments in their subject, they will provide a numerical value for whatever the task is, and they'll also rank students using those numbers. And of course, at the end of the year, if you're doing a scored assessment in Unit 3-4, you will be required to sit exams that are set by VCAR that are unseen until the moment that they're unveiled. So in terms of the standard VCE, all the units from Unit 1 to 4 have what are called outcomes, and they're basically assessed as either satisfactory or unsatisfactory. So for example, in the subject that I'm teaching in Unit 2 PE, there are 2 outcomes, and I have to be able to assess a student as being satisfactory or unsatisfactory in both of those outcomes. If a student is unsatisfactory in any of those outcomes, they will get an N for that particular unit. In order to get a satisfactory completion, all the outcomes in a particular unit must be assessed as being satisfactory. The way that teachers do that is both through classwork, project work, homework, oral and written presentations, and also what we call SAC or school assessed coursework, which are more like, if you like, the traditional tests that most of us are aware of. If we're doing Unit 3-4, then again, if it's if you're doing it as an unscored pathway, then the teacher is really just saying you are satisfactorily completing the outcome, and that can be done in a variety of ways. If you're doing it as a score, then you have to again sit for SACs and exams, and you'll be given a numerical score, which is used to rank your performance. If you're doing scored assessment, there are strict supervision rules around that. So it is important that teachers can authenticate that the work that is done is the students. It's also really important that students do scored assessment on the same day as other students, so there's no advantage to a student who perhaps wants to do the SAC a little bit later. Of course, if someone is sick or is unable to sit a SAC on a particular day, provided there is a medical certificate, then the SAC can be sit at slightly later dates. One of the things that I wanted to talk about tonight was the fact that if you have a student who is in Year 11 at the moment and they are currently doing a Unit 3-4 subject, then their options next year are to either do 5 study scores, and that will certainly apply to anyone who is not doing a Unit 3-4 this year. But most of our students now, if they've got 1 Unit 3-4, will opt to do 4 Unit 3-4s instead of 5. And the benefit of that is it does give students a little bit more time in Year 12 to concentrate on 4 subjects rather than 5. A Year 2 vet can count as a Unit 3-4 sequence. I guess without trying to worry about it too much at the moment, if you are in that situation, if you do have a son or daughter who is doing a Year 12 subject this year, a Unit 3-4, and they complete it satisfactorily, then the option to do 4 units rather than 5 is certainly a viable one. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time before I throw it open for questions to talk about the ATAR and how that's calculated, because that is sometimes a cause for some confusion amongst parents and students. So in order to qualify for an ATAR through VTAC, which is the Victorian Tertiary Admittance Corporation, you must achieve a study score in at least 4 permissible Unit 3 and 4 studies, including 1 from English. So to break that down, you have to do at least English in Year 12 and at least 3 others and get a study score, and that will lead to an ATAR. The majority of students at Sydenham will do 5 subjects, and some will do 6. The ATAR is calculated through VCE study scores, which are provided by VCART, and VTAC, which is a completely separate body, then scales those scores to ensure fairness. An aggregate is created by adding up your primary 4, that is the highest scaled study score in one of the English, and then the next 3 highest. So that's what's known as your primary 4, and I'll show you some examples of this in a moment. And then you get increments. So if you do 5 subjects or 6 subjects, you often get a 10% of any 5th or 6th scaled study score. And I'll show you some examples of how that works. After your study scores are calculated, the VTAC calculates your aggregate, and the total of all your permissible contributions are then used to calculate the ATAR. There are some rules and regulations around what combinations of studies are allowed, but we look after that when we do the course counselling moving in from Year 11 to 12. And then once we've got the aggregate, we then create, or I don't, but the VTAC will create percentile scales with intervals of 0.05, which converts an aggregate to an ATAR. Again, I think I'll be better off to show you some examples rather than go through this as a kind of slide. You can see also down the bottom there that the group of students with the highest aggregates will be assigned the highest ATAR of 99.95, and ATARs below 30 are reported as less than 30 on a printed ATAR statement. So unfortunately, we do have some students, not many, but some students who get less than 30, they will just simply see less than 30. So aggregates, as you can see here, are used to, on a sliding scale, to provide, so for example, students here in the 90 or above, we're saying there that they performed above 90% of their age group in a particular year. And of course, as we go down, a 70 score, 70%, they perform better than 70% of the cohort, all the way down to obviously some lower scores. And the way that a study score is calculated is important, I think, to understand, because sometimes we think that if a student gets a score of 35 out of 50, that's really 70%, and it's not. So the purpose of this slide is to say, all right, if you think about all of the students who do a particular study, so let's say health and human development in Victoria, so it's a big population of students, those students are kind of placed in this bell curve. So a student who falls right in the middle of that bell curve is going to get a score of 30. Anything that's above 30 puts you in the top 50% of the students in that cohort, and anything below 30 means that you've scored in the bottom 50% of the cohort across the state. And you can see as you start to get further and further along this bell curve, for example, a score here of 40, very, very few people are in that part of the bell curve, about 7 to 9%. The majority of students are going to score in any particular study somewhere between 35 and 25. For the mathematicians amongst you, study scores are calculated. They have an average of 30 and a standard deviation of 7. again, just some maths here. So 68% of all the students are going to fall in that part of the curve. 95% of the students are going to fall into this part of the curve. And the majority of students, of course, are going to be somewhere in that bell curve. The purpose of this is to say that a score of 40, and certainly scores of 45, you have to be really in that top few in terms of the students who complete that study. Okay, how's the ATAR calculated? As we said before, you do have to have at least one English subject, in this case literature, and this student has also done specialist maths, philosophy, and another higher education subject. You can see that the best scores, English has to be in there, so you can't, even though that's not in the best 4, it has to be there. The other VTAC scaled scores are here, and you can see that this 5th subject had an increment, so it was 4.49. All right, that then creates an aggregate of 194.65. That is all of these numbers added together, and that is obviously a very high ATAR. The ATAR is a percentile ranking, so it's impossible to get an ATAR of 100. It will be, the highest will be 99.95. Here's some more examples. So this student, their English was a study score of 35, BCD 48, further math 43, psychology 41, and then of course, even though health was higher than English, it has to be down here as the 5th and 6th. You can see that scaled study scores of those top 4 contribute quite significantly, and then 10% of this number and 10% of that number. Add those 6 together, 173.34. That's an ATAR of 96, or 95.75. Here's another example. Again, you can see English, even though it wasn't in the top 4 numerically, it has to be in there. You get primary 4, there they are, 10%, 10%, add those all together, there's the aggregate, there's the ATAR. Here's another one, very high performing student. Again, you can see they've got primary 4, 10%, 10%, extremely high ATAR. I think this is my last one. You can see this one's not so good. English was not great. Chinese wasn't too bad. Specialist maths not so good. And the algorithmics also not so good. So aggregate was 96.8. That was an ATAR of 49.15. During this year, if your son or daughter is in year 12, very soon they will get an estimated ATAR that we calculate internally. That's based on year 11 performance. The purpose of that is a number of things. Firstly, it gives students some indication of what they might expect to get at the end of the year if they continue to work as they did in year 11. And that might allow some discussions around the types of courses that might be available to that student at the end of the year. Of course, it's not written in stone that if you get an estimated ATAR of 75, that's what you're going to get at the end of the year. It might be better, it might be worse. And in year 11, during term 2, they will work through a process to assist them as they begin to contemplate their post-school destinations. Because in year 11, in term 3, we're going to be asking students to make some pretty important decisions about, number one, what their pathway is in terms of scores or unscored. Secondly, what kind of subjects do they need to do to maximise their final results at the end of 2024. So I've gone through quite a bit of information there in a relatively short amount of time. I'm just going to throw it open now through the chat room to answer any questions that you might have about anything that I've presented, because there was a lot of information there. Or if there's something that I haven't presented and you'd like to ask me, I will try and answer them as best I can. Or if I can't, I will try and get back to you. So I'm going to throw it open now, the chat room, for any questions. Well, it looks like either I've confused you with too much information or I've answered all of your questions. I'm hoping it's the latter. I will stay on for a little bit longer, but if there are no more questions, or if there are no questions, I'm happy to close the session, but we'll just hang on for a little bit longer. Yes, there will be a recording of this webinar. We'll put that on our website. If there are no more questions at the moment, that's great, but I'm certainly available at the college to answer questions either through sector direct message or via a phone call or an email. I would say that's probably better through direct messaging or email. It's a little bit harder to get me on the phone sometimes. Okay, well, it looks like there are no more questions. So firstly, thank you very much for your attendance tonight. I know that I did go through a lot of information there. If something is prompted in you over the next day or two and you'd like more clarification, I'm more than happy to answer them. But there being no more questions, I think we can, happy for you to log off if you want to.